Logan, will you share your full revert story with us?
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. So basically, man, I think for me the biggest thing was, you know, I think we all get tested in different ways in life, and ultimately, what happened for me was, um, I already lived a very sort of Islamic life, to begin with, right? I was very sort of disciplined in the sense, I was really big into the gym and the diet and all that sort of stuff. So I sort of lived this very disciplined lifestyle. I was getting up early every day before I go to work, get a workout in, always working hard sort of thing, trying to provide. Um, and then, you live that sort of, I guess you'd say like typical Western lifestyle of, working hard, saving up, trying to buy a house, do all these things. You're chasing this sort of level of fulfillment that, you think you're going to be satisfied with, by the time, you get a house or you get the second house or you get a car or whatever the case may be. And, ultimately, like, you meet someone and then, you go down that path, you get married and all these sorts of things. And this all happened obviously before I found Islam. But, ultimately what happened was that, I thought I had everything. I had a wife, had a house, had a child, all this sort of stuff. And then ultimately, you go through this big trial in life where, all of a sudden you get divorced and, you separate with, a woman that you had a child with and you thought you were going to spend your life with and all this sort of stuff. And then you start to question everything, right? You sort of question like, um, what was I doing all this for? Like you thought that you met someone, you're going to be with this person, you're going to, build a life for the rest of your life, you're going to have a family, you gradually build on what you might have had in life and all this sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden that's not there anymore. And you sort of have this sort of feeling of like, okay, well, what am I doing now? Like you feel a bit lost. You feel like, well, I was chasing all this purpose. I thought I had everything figured out. And then all of a sudden it's gone, and you try and fix it, you try and get it back, or you try and work it out and you try and figure out, I thought this was right. This has to be right. Like, this is what I thought I wanted, all this sort of stuff. And then ultimately, like, you end up in this place where you're just like, well, okay, well, I'm not there anymore and I can't get back to where I was. So where do I go from here? Right. And, as ambitious young men, we always try and, run a business, or we try and build something for ourselves and, try and get ahead in life and, whatever the goal is for each individual. It leads you down different paths as well. And, this is where sort of one of the paths of where I eventually, met some Muslim brothers, which alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful for. Because that had a massive impact in my life too, because, I joined a community online, which I'm still a part of now. And, there was a lot of Muslim brothers in there. And I think, at that time, I was just very much still chasing that successful lifestyle. I've never really cared about the luxuries and stuff, but like, just to have that, financial freedom and all that sort of stuff that you sort of chase. Um, but ultimately, I made a friend over in Dubai when I was there for a community meetup. And his name's Hasim. He's a beautiful guy, man, beautiful brother. Like, alhamdulillah, I'm so grateful for this dude. Um, I remember the very first time I met him, man. Like, he was just like, "Whoa!" He's like, "You have such great hair." Or like, I had hair at the time, and he's like, "You have such great hair." And he's like, "Oh, your skin is so nice. Like, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, bro, I do nothing. Like, I'm out in the sun all day." But he's just like, it's just super complimentary. Like, it was insane. Like, he's such a nice guy. Um, and obviously, he was a Muslim as well. And, I think I asked him a few questions about like Islam and stuff like that. It made me curious, right? I was just had this sort of curiosity now where I was just like, like obviously I'm still trying to figure out where I am, who I am and all this sort of stuff. And then I meet this guy that's like, so friendly, so welcoming and all this sort of stuff and speaks so friendly and beautifully. And then, you sort of do a bit of digging yourself. Like, for me personally, like, I always believed that there was a God. I always believed that there was a higher power, there was something, right? But I never ultimately really knew where that was. Like, I grew up and I went to a Christian school. Like, none of my family are religious, like, at all, right? None of them believe in anything. So, I went to a Christian school, had a bit of a Christian background, all this sort of stuff. So, had a bit of knowledge behind, the way that Christian life is. But obviously never really fully committed to down that path. So alhamdulillah, it was really good to have the knowledge, right? To have a bit of background because there's a lot of synchronicity between Christianity and Islam. Um, but yeah, having met this guy, like it made me really curious. So I started, asking questions for myself, like, what is Islam? Like, what does it mean to be a Muslim and all these sorts of things? And um, I sort of just learned a lot of these things about like it's a very sort of traditional way of living in regards to like a way a Westerner would see it, right? Like, the wife or the woman or whatever would stay home, make the house a home, right? The man would go out, work hard, provide, do all these things. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but from a very basic standpoint, like, I saw a lot of these sort of old fashioned traditional values, and I was like, this sounds like the way it's supposed to be. Like this is the way we're supposed to live, right? I'm like, I didn't understand any other way of life because, I don't like to get into debates and all the other stuff. Everyone can believe what they want to believe, and everyone can do what they want to do. But there was a lot of things that I was just seeing in the world that just, I don't know, that just seemed really strange. Like there was a lot of push and agendas for certain things, and I was just like, bro, I want to stay away from all of this stuff. I don't want to go anywhere near it. And ultimately, like, the more you learn about Islam, the more you realize like how long it's been around for, the validity to it, the factual synchronicity with what goes on in the world, right? And bro, like the amount of stuff I've learned now and like how it aligns with everything that goes on in the world, and like it's like I don't even understand how you can fault it now. It's just like there's so many beautiful things that align from not only the Quran but like how we activate, like how we live in the world, right? And like I used to think that I was a very sort of chill and grateful person, and all this sort of stuff, but like the more you become a Muslim, the more you realize like the more you practice Islam, I suppose you really understand what gratitude is. You know, it's not just like, oh, I've got work today, or I'm making money, or like or whatever the case may be. You're so much more grateful for simple things like, just having the ability to see, bro. Like, having the ability to just get up in the morning and like be healthy. Like, just on such a very simplistic level, you have so much like more gratitude for things in life. And yeah, like the more I practice Islam, the more it sort of reveals itself, and it's just like it's just incredibly beautiful. Like honestly, alhamdulillah, I'm so genuinely grateful for where I'm at in life right now. And honestly, it wouldn't have been sort of without having met that brother in Dubai, man. He was like, it's funny, man, because I'll talk to him about this after, and I'll tell him to watch this because like he's such an amazing guy, man. He'll love this too because like he's super humble and he's super friendly, so he'll really love it. But um, I've had a lot of challenges in life, bro, and I think the biggest thing is like everyone sort of looks for purpose, and it was really interesting. I was at Jummah the other day, and the Imam was talking about purpose, right, and purpose in life. And as brothers in Islam, like we know what our purpose is, right? Like we're created by Allah, and then our purpose is to worship Allah, and then we return to Allah, right? And it makes it super super simple. Whereas like when you live in this sort of Western society, you get a little bit sort of lost and confused, and like is this the right path, is this, no, this isn't working, but this will work, I don't know. You get confused, and you end up going down these spirals of sort of getting lost or depressed, or you can't find your purpose and all this sort of stuff, which is ultimately what happened to me in a sense. And honestly, if it wasn't for Islam, then I would have never, I don't know where I'd be today. Like you just really don't know. So you got to be. That's just another thing to be grateful for, right? Like you just never really know where you could have been if these doors weren't open for you. So, I interestingly, like I took my shahada not in the sort of common sense. Like I don't know if this is actually like valid or not. I think it is because I've looked into it and I thought this was valid, but I didn't do it with an imam. Like I just did it with me and Allah, right? So like I basically said to myself that I wanted to become a Muslim. I think this is the way for me. I think this is the way of life, and this is the life that I want to live. Like I knew nothing about Islam to in depth that I know a lot more now. Um, but like I took my shahada just by myself with Allah. Like I didn't go to a mosque or anything. I was like not fearful or like worried or anything about, but like I just felt like initially like I didn't belong, bro. Like I was this white Australian dude with a ginger beard, like it felt really sort of. I felt like I was going to be an outcast, and I feel like maybe a lot of reverts might even feel like that where whenever I first initially thought about Muslims, bro, I thought about mainly Arabs, man. Like tan Middle Eastern, like you know, obviously like big beards or anything like that. But I felt like I wouldn't have fit in. So I think for me, like I was just like, oh, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm just going to learn at my own pace, and I'm just going to become, you know, as if I as learn as fast as I'm going to learn, and whatever happens happens, and I'll just trust Allah that I'm on this path, and I'll learn at whatever pace I'm supposed to learn at. And the crazy thing is as well, like you really can learn as fast as you want to learn, right? Like there's so many things that I've learned within a day just because I've like really invested some time into learning those things. um, but ultimately, bro, after I took that shahada with Allah, I was just I was like, all right, sweet, now I'll consider myself a Muslim 100%. And I still felt like a bit uncomfortable with like telling people that I was a Muslim, because I think unfortunately the picture that is painted around Muslims is that, they're all bad people, and, they all do bad things and all this sort of stuff. But bro, like the more you learn about it, like the more you just realize it really is just maybe lack of information, lack of insight, really understanding. It's ignorance, man. Like you don't see how beautiful Muslims and Islam is for what it is, for like the way, if you practice Islam the way it's supposed to be practiced, bro, like it's so peaceful, it's so calming, like just trusting Allah and then just working hard, doing what you need to do, praying, all that sort of stuff. Like, dude, it makes life so much easier. And yeah, I think those first few months, bro, like you sort of just learning things, you sort of just figuring it out, and like what does this mean now? Like, what should I do? Should I reach out to more people, or should I, tell people that I'm a Muslim or anything like that? I think what ultimately happened, bro, is like I started doing some jobs for people, and because I'm in construction, so I started doing some jobs for people, and I sort of got the sense that they were also Muslims, and I was just like, I'd say like Alhamdulillah or something, and they'd look at me funny. They'd be like, what? What's that? What'd you say? I'd be like, yeah, Alhamdulillah, brother, of course. And they're like, oh, you Muslim? Yeah. Oh, no, no way, really? Oh my God, mashallah, like all this, like so excited because, people get, well, as I've sort of come to learn, it's like a lot of brothers that maybe are born into Islam, they really see the beauty behind when someone sort of finds it on their own, like, and that's what we do as reverts. We sort of get guided onto this path, and alhamdulillah, we're grateful for that. But yeah, I had a lot of people being like, again, just super kind, man, like super kind. Like whenever I was, introduced or met someone that was also a Muslim, like, oh my gosh, you're a Muslim, alhamdulillah. Tell me what made you revert, like all this sort of stuff. Like they ask you all these questions, and like they seem super excited. Oh, it's amazing, mashallah. You need anything like happy to come talk to you. Like tell you all about it. Like, oh, did you pray? Like, all this sort of stuff. Like, it's interesting the things that you keep learning over time. Like, I never really understood like the significance of prayer, man. And like, whether you can see it or not, like, I've got that archway behind me, and I built that because I'm like, I want to have a dedicated space for prayer, bro. Because like, the more I learn about Islam, the more I realize, like, dude, I didn't even know. Like, I remember it's like I only learned this a couple of months ago, and like in the azan, it literally says, "Come to prayer, come to success." So you know what I mean? Like I didn't even know that, man. And it's just like every day, 5 times a day, it's saying, "Hey, come pray, and then you'll have success." It's just like it's so simple, It's just like prioritize prayer in your life, and you'll find success. The thing is, and the success doesn't have to be monetary. It can be anything in life.